Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me in this Breakthrough Leadership video series. This video series is called B2B, From Brokenness to Breakthrough. I'm Matt DeYoung, and I want to welcome you. If you're watching this video right now and you're a Christian business leader, and you're battling for breakthrough in areas like your personal leadership, your organization, your team, or even just trying to achieve your vision, I want to assure you that you're in the right place. Because our goal is to help you unlock your purpose, live with passion, and become the leader that you were created to be. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking with Greg Yates about his story and also about his book called Broken, How Being Broken Unlocked the Greatest Success of My Life. I know his story can impact your leadership and can change your perspective about life. So Greg, you were just saying how your definition of success had changed, say, before 2011 and then after. And what I heard you say is that there might become limits of our success just based on whether we have a definition or not. But there's other limits I know that you've kind of discovered over time. Specifically, there's 4 or 5 anchors that hold us back as leaders. What are those?
Yeah. Well, the identification I've made on those limits are these: the mask, the loop, the fight, and the frame.
Yeah, I love those names, and I know we're going to spend some time kind of unpacking and explaining them. But the first one we want to start with is the mask. What is the mask?
You know, I've found a lot of different ways to explain this, and to myself, basically, to identify it. In the book, I talk a lot about compartmentalization, the idea that we would become who we need to be based on the circumstance. And the reality for me is that the mask for me became living up to expectations. It became technique versus change. And you might say, well, what's that mean? Well, to me, that meant in every environment I was in, I learned and intuitively perceived what was necessary to fit into that environment. And we learn these things as business techniques. You know what I'm talking about. I mean, we learn, mirror back to the person who's talking to you what they're already saying. Learn to speak what they're hearing, language. And I was a master at that. But what I finally learned was that by creating masks that I could live with in every environment, in effect, I was fracturing myself to the point that my personal identity couldn't be discerned from the mask.
So a mask is essentially, we put on something, we call it a masquerade, put on a mask to protect and cover up, and to fit a role as well. So you've achieved success over 30 years. You used some of the masks to achieve that success. You provided jobs, you owned companies, and you generated wealth, let's be honest. So what's so bad about masks at this point if it, quite frankly, worked?
Yeah. Well, again, we go back to the definition for what worked. I mean, what was I achieving with these masks? And my experience, I believe that businessmen, especially men, watching this video are going to understand and nod their heads with what I'm talking about. Yeah. What I had experienced was that the better I became at the masquerade, if you will, in my mind, that was the mission. That was the mission, to become absolutely the best at meeting expectations, to become absolutely the best in the role that I was in at that moment. And the further and further, the better and better I got, the further I went down that trail, although it achieved the results I thought I wanted, I had no identity myself. My own definition of success became more and more diluted.
Right. So the question, though, we kind of hit on it a little bit already. Why do we wear the mask? And maybe we just have to go a little further. Why are leaders especially susceptible to wearing these masks? I mean, we want people to see what we want.
That's right.
But we don't necessarily want them to see what we don't want.
That's right. Well, I can tell you really easily why we wear the masks.
Yeah.
Because they work. They work. They get us the momentary results that we want. One of the things, as I've just poured myself into understanding change, that I've come to realize about the mask is that the mask is really a substitute for change. It's one of the biggest substitutes that we use. And this is so true in business. It's so true in relationships, in family. It's so true in the church. It's so true when we can speak to things, you know, the Monday morning quarterback stuff, you know, when we can speak to things that we can't actually do. But we can play those roles. You want to talk about flying, you want to talk about sports, you want to talk about these things. Many people can place themselves in that role. And in their minds, they have almost like maybe it's an endorphin release, almost as if they experienced it, but they didn't experience it. It becomes a point where the mask, I don't believe, often is outward anymore. It's inward. We see the mask, and it becomes who we think we are, and how we think we're being perceived, and how we believe the world is looking at us. And that's for one big reason. Because we're afraid that if we took the mask off, nobody would value us at all.
They would know what's really going on. The problem with wearing the mask, the good part about wearing the mask is you get the results. The bad part is the longer you wear it, if I hear you right, the more it becomes who you are. It becomes your identity. So what are some of the symptoms? If you're wearing the mask for too long, you start to become the mask. How would you know as a leader, if someone watching this video, how would they know that they're wearing masks that might be affecting them or limiting them as leaders?
What a great question. I would love to think that we would intuitively see that in ourselves, but we don't, or I didn't. All I know is my own experience. Because we believe that gamemanship,
right,
you know, that particular design of business, because we believe that that's where we need to go. Every time the masks get cracked, or we suddenly see that someone saw behind the mask for just a moment, we're terrified. We're terrified. So more and more, we build on a false belief that we're nothing, and that only in our ability to perform in this environment can we be something. The only way that's going to change, because I believe your question was, how would we know?
Yeah.
How would we know? The only way that's going to change is by identifying the questions that we're asking ourselves. Mm-hmm. Because I can guarantee you this, during that time frame when I was living in a multitude of masks, I had no peace because there was no ability for me to focus or relax at any moment. I couldn't relax because I had to respond. I had to constantly be in a responsive mode as to what my conditions were, what compartment I was living in, and what the expectations were of me, because it wasn't natural. It wasn't synergy. There was no traction. Yeah. There was no traction in my life other than sorting through what the identity was that needed to occur in that moment, so I could do what? Make money, make a deal, so nobody would see me be vulnerable. Oh my word, we could talk for hours about vulnerability.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is when you have to put on masks to fit the role, to get the result, there's no peace, there's no rest, and quite frankly, sometimes it feels like we don't have the significance that we need. What's the defining moment from your own story, just to put this in practical terms, so we don't talk too abstractly, but practical terms, what's the defining moment in your story where the mask had finally affected your own ability to lead and maybe held you back?
I would love to say that, I somehow identified all these things and pulled myself up by my own bootstraps.
It'd be a great story.
It'd be a great story. I love that story.
Yeah.
I wish I could have written that story, Matt. I would have loved to have written that story. Right. I can tell you that that's what's occurring in my life now, because I've identified the process of brokenness to breakthrough, of identifying the areas where I can literally voluntarily be broken in order to move towards genuine results. But I can tell you that what flashes into my mind is a moment where I had to come to grips with like the bonfire of all these carefully built identities. And it wasn't easy. I can remember sitting in my office when the building is full of investigators and guys that are loading up in boxes every file in the building, and suddenly intersecting with the false masks and what they had done to me and to other people. I mean, you can't even fathom. I have to be careful even letting myself go there sometimes. You can't fathom the level of regret and of pain and of horror when we realize that suddenly we're defenseless and nothing matters anymore. We couldn't get enough adrenaline up to even pick the mask up and put it on anymore. And I remember sitting in that office just numb, trying to decide who I was, what was next, what was even possible, and literally believing that it was over, that I'd had my chance and it was over. In fact, in those moments, I don't remember what was said. There were a few casual conversations with, the investigators that were there just basically scraping everything off everybody's desks. One of the guys called my attorney and told him he thought I might be a suicide risk. Now, that was never going to happen. Yeah, I know, we've never talked about that, but that was never going to happen. But in his mind, I was mulling through the fact that, wait a minute, there was a nuclear explosion that just occurred, and I don't know how to survive it.
We've talked about this scenario, this exact scenario where the mask is cracked, pulled away, there's nothing left, and it feels like a nuclear fallout where everyone knows what's inside the bomb now, and whether we chose it or it chose us through circumstance, there's nothing left but vulnerability, isn't there? That's
exactly right. And you want to rebuild, you think, how can I put all this back together? How can I just put it all back together and you pretend that it's okay?
Because sometimes it's worked.
Sometimes it works. Sometimes at least we think it works.
Yeah. But here's the thing. You used a beautiful phrase that I want to kind of give you and remind you about. You said that there's moments where you can have unplanned clarity. After you've been wearing the mask for too long, you can have this moment of unplanned clarity. What do you mean by this?
Yeah. Well, I have a distinct visual reference in my mind of unplanned versus planned clarity. Unplanned clarity is really painful.
Yeah.
Unplanned clarity comes, for guys, a lot of times it comes when they're having a heart attack.
Yep.
Suddenly, all the things they didn't have time to do and couldn't do, they have time now.
It's clear now.
Yeah, it's very clear.
Yeah.
Very clear. And often, we'll find ourselves realizing that we don't like wearing the mask.
Yeah.
For lack of a better metaphor, we don't like wearing the mask. We're uncomfortable, it's irritating, and we don't like it, but we don't know what to do about it. Mm-hmm. And unplanned clarity is my reference to the fact of it just got ripped off your face and everybody sees the real you.
Yeah. Wow. It wasn't your choice. What specifically caused you to notice the mask in your own life, and how has it affected your perspective on leadership and even in your life in general?
I was good with the mask. I had no problem with the mask. I believed it was a career skill.
Right.
I really did. I'm going to be clear about that. It wasn't accidental. It was about understanding my role in a particular situation, whether it was a negotiation, whether it was how do I get a certain performance out of my employees, how do I bring a certain perspective to my team, all of those things were not about vulnerability. They were about invulnerability, or my perception of it. So I was very good with the mask. My retrospective view of the mask is the only one I have. Mm-hmm. And that comes through the magical process of awareness. Right. Awareness. We could talk all day about awareness. But suddenly when we become aware of the truth, it's like an out-of-body experience. We're looking at what was occurring and we're realizing that this little routine, this little party, this little game was nothing. It was like a little app on your cell phone, and you really thought you were having fun. You really thought it was mesmerizing and that you were big stuff. You'd really done something successful. And you look back and realize that there was zero traction occurring in your personal growth and in you becoming the leader, me becoming the leader that I wanted to be.
There's nothing more painful, I think, especially for guys, especially for leaders, to have an unplanned moment of clarity where their identity is ripped from them and they realize what's beneath is really not what they had worked for. But we get on these loops and we go around and around in the track just wearing the mask.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
and
right.
It's endless.
That's right.
And I know in our next video you want to talk about the loop. Could you just give us a little teaser about that?
Well, I mean, the reality is, okay, so you're aware of the mask, right?
Yeah.
Aha moments don't change lives.
Yep.
I mean, they can position you for awareness. They can open a door, but just having an aha moment. I mean, everybody's walked away from a great movie. Everybody's walked away from a funeral. Everybody's walked away from something that they felt impacted them. A seminar, don't you love it? You know, we go to a seminar, we take all these notes, and we never look at them again.
Yeah, binders full.
The problem is that the reinforcement of the mask, the real symptomatic nature of the mask is continually reaffirmed by the loops, the endless loops of self-affirming identity that we play out again and again and again in our lives. And they become, co-joined, they become codependent. And that's what I want to talk about next time is the powerful loops that we're unaware of in our lives.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for your time today and for what you shared. And thank you for joining us in this Breakthrough Leadership video. We'll see you next time.